All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. The science of shit testing, cracking women's cryptic signals and winning their hearts, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The epistemology of the shit test. Surviving female double binds, cosmetic extortion, and the Marxist state's macro shit test on men. Imagine the tragicomic spectacle of the modern mating ritual, where you are expected to navigate a minefield blindfolded while the female instructor changes the map every 30 seconds. She looks you dead in the eye and declares, "I hate men who always need to be the smartest person in the room." So, being the rational fellow you are, you defer. You let the idiot at the end of the table spew nonsense to keep the peace. Her verdict: you have no backbone. This is the testum crucible, the ancient earthen vessel used to assay precious metals, firing at maximum heat. She is not making a logical error. She is weaponizing a double bind. A man who asserts his competence is an arrogant tyrant. A man who defers to preserve harmony is a diagnosed coward. The goal is not your improvement. The goal is the manufacture of a perpetual grievance to justify her own chaotic nature. This is biological solipsism weaponized by a therapeutic state hell-bent on pathologizing every masculine virtue into a disease. Your stoicism, that is toxic compartmentalization. Your righteous anger at injustice, that is a red flag. The feminized complex demands you be vulnerable, which translated from the original wokish simply means, please hand me the ammunition to blow your head off during the divorce deposition. You are dealing with a creature whose evolutionary imperative demands she submit to a man stronger than her ego, yet her fragile self-esteem demands you pretend she is your intellectual equal. It is a demand for a physical impossibility. True masculine emotional regulation is not the suppression of feeling, but the classical subordination of passion to reason. You feel the full, devastating weight of reality, yet you act according to your duty. That is the transcendental good in action. Then comes the aesthetic fraud, the grotesque carnival of noticing. She spends 3 hours applying chemical warfare to her face and 500 on hair dye, then walks past you while you're busy performing the actual telos of provision, reading, building, thinking, and waits for her applause. When you fail to immediately drop your tools and worship her effort, you are hit with, you never notice anything. She is testing your vigilance. Yes, but she is also demanding you validate a lie. The same ideology that screeches beauty standards are oppression simultaneously builds a multi-billion-dollar industry of injectables to beg for the very male gaze it claims to despise. To submit to this fraud is to endorse the death of the true and the beautiful. This solipsism scales from the living room to the halls of power. She wants you isolated, demanding you cut off your brothers because they make her uncomfortable, which is code for, they see through me. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse and his cultural Marxist heirs understood that the way to conquer the West was to replace the husband with the state. The government is now the ultimate hypergamous alpha, providing the welfare, enforcing the alimony, and legislating safety from hurt feelings. Men are the sole net lifetime taxpayers in this equation. Yet we are systematically alienated from our own labor. We are funding our own cultural execution. It is time to stop apologizing for the competence that built this world. When she demands you castrate your intellect or abandon your friends, you must look her in the eye and let her emotional storm crash against the cliffs of your resolve. Withdraw your consent from the rigged game. Defend your oaths, build your brotherhoods, and let the false idols of gynocentrism crumble under the weight of their own logical bankruptcy. The epistemology of the double bind, solipsism, emotional pathology, and the cult of the backbone. A woman will ask a man to jump off a cliff, and if he does it to prove his love, she will despise him for being stupid enough to jump. If he refuses, she will despise him for being too cowardly to prove his love. Either way, she is already sleeping with the man who pushed him. This crude but devastating proverb circulates in every language, every culture, every epoch of recorded history, because it encodes a permanent truth about the feminine testing mechanism that modern academia has spent billions of dollars trying to bury under mountains of pseudo-scientific jargon and sensitivity training manuals. Let us fix our terms with the precision of a classical grammarian before the fog of feminist euphemism consumes us entirely. The Latin testum refers to an earthen vessel, a crucible, used by ancient metallurgists to assay the purity of precious metals. The metal goes in, the fire burns hot. The dross, the impurities, the weakness, the fraud rises to the surface and is scraped away. What remains is verified, proven, certified by fire. When we speak of shit tests, we are not discussing mere female caprice or emotional incontinence, though both are abundant in the modern specimen. We are describing a biological crucible, an evolutionary stress test hard-coded into the feminine psyche over millennia of natural selection, designed to burn away the dross of male weakness before the woman commits her reproductive future to a man's genetic stock and provisioning capacity. The word emotion itself derives from the Latin imova, to move out, to agitate, to disturb. A woman's emotional storm is not an accident, it is the shaking of the vessel to see if it cracks. Consider the tragic, empirically verifiable case study that plays out in suburbia every single day, a tragedy so common it has become a statistical certainty rather than an anecdotal curiosity. The modern husband, let us call him David, because I have met 100 Davids, takes his wife's advice to be less aggressive at work. She complains about his hours, his intensity, his refusal to suffer fools gladly in the boardroom. She speaks the language of modern therapeutic culture. You need work-life balance. You need to be more present. You need to be vulnerable with me, so David softens. He agrees to the HR department's diversity dictates. He defers to loud, incompetent peers who happen to possess the correct combination of melanin and grievance. He stops volunteering for the hard projects. He becomes, by every metric of modern therapeutic approval, a better man. Within 18 months, David is passed over for promotion. His wife's panties dry up like the Sahara in August. She initiates divorce citing his lack of ambition and loss of drive, which is to say, she cites the exact qualities she herself demanded he surrender. She destroyed his livelihood by enforcing a standard she is biologically repulsed by, and the family court system, gynocentric to its rotten core, will reward her betrayal with half his assets and a monthly extraction ceremony euphemistically called support. The formal logic of this ubiquitous feminine contradiction reduces to a devastating syllogism that every man must memorize like the Lord's Prayer. Premise A man who asserts his competence and refuses to defer to collective ignorance is labeled an arrogant tyrant, a red flag, a narcissist, a threat to emotional safety. Premise B, a man who defers to the group to preserve harmony, who suppresses his competence to make others comfortable, is diagnosed as a spineless coward, a disappointment. Precisely the kind of man who used to have such potential. Conclusion: the modern gynocentric standard demands a physical and psychological impossibility, which reveals that the goal is not male improvement, but the manufacture of a perpetual pretext for female grievance. The house always wins. The game is rigged. The dice are loaded. This is not accident but design. Women are biologically and psychologically anchored in solipsism, an evolutionary necessity for maternal survival that becomes utterly tyrannical when unleashed from the constraints of natural law, classical virtue, and institutional oversight. The mother who places her infant's needs above all external reality is performing a biological duty. The wife who demands her husband restructure his entire psyche to accommodate her hourly emotional fluctuations is performing a tyranny. When a woman claims to hate the smartest man in the room, and she will make this declaration with stunning regularity, she does not hate intelligence. She hates the threat of being outclassed. She demands intellectual submission to protect her fragile ego, while her biological imperative simultaneously demands she submit only to a man she cannot intellectually dominate. The solipsism is the point. The contradiction is the feature, not the bug. She is testing the metal in the crucible, and the correct answer is never verbal agreement, but unshakable presence. The cultural Marxist apparatus, that rancid superstructure of institutional feminism, thrives by pathologizing normal male emotional expression with a ruthlessness that would make the Spanish Inquisition blush. A man's righteous anger at injustice, say, at being passed over for promotion in favor of a demonstrably inferior candidate who checks the correct diversity boxes, is reframed as toxicity. His natural stoicism, the classical virtue of enduring suffering without complaint, is smeared as toxic compartmentalization, a phrase invented by lesbian therapists in the 1970s who have never built a bridge, fought a war, or buried a friend. This is a deliberate, demonic inversion of the cardinal virtue of fortitude, the steady endurance of suffering for a just cause, reclassified by the feminized therapeutic state as a psychological disorder requiring immediate chemical castration through SSRI prescriptions or endless monetized therapy sessions where the patient is trained to perform his emotions like a trained seal for female approval. The APA's 219 guidelines on traditional masculinity, which explicitly pathologized competitiveness, stoicism, and aggression as harmful, represent the complete capture of institutional psychology by an ideology that views male competence as an existential threat. The leftist weaponization of clinical psychology constitutes a masterclass in what we might term gamma bias, the systematic framing of legitimate male traits as pathologies while elevating female emotional incontinence to the status of unassailable wisdom. By slapping the label red flag onto legitimate male assertiveness, or diagnosing male confidence as narcissistic pathology, women and their simpering male allies attempt to preemptively disarm male competence through rhetorical trickery rather than actual achievement. It is the Janshua of the week. If you cannot defeat the warrior in combat, redefine combat as a mental illness. If you cannot match the builder's skill, redefine craftsmanship as oppression. The gamma bias operates by elevating female feelings, subjective, shifting, unfalsifiable by design, to the status of natural law, completely bypassing the empirical reality of male capability. The female tier becomes more authoritative than the male spreadsheet, the female accusation more binding than the male evidence, the female discomfort more legally actionable than the male labor. This is not progress. This is the collapse of epistemological order, the replacement of logos with pathos as the organizing principle of civilization. The modern feminist demands men be vulnerable because she seeks tactical intelligence on his weaknesses to weaponize them during the inevitable divorce proceedings. I have seen the text messages. I have read the court filings. The husband who confessed his childhood trauma to his wife over a bottle of Merlot, believing he was building intimacy, discovers 18 months later that his vulnerability has been transmuted into a court exhibit, demonstrating his unfitness as a parent. The man who admitted to periods of depression finds his medical records subpoenaed by his wife's attorney, his honest confession rewritten as evidence of emotional instability warranting the restriction of his custody rights. Men of the West, hear me plainly, conceal your strategic weaknesses. Your vulnerability is a privilege reserved solely for your brotherhood, your confessor, and your God, not for a creature biologically wired to deploy your secrets as tactical ordnance the moment her hypergamous gaze wanders to a higher status male. The divorce courts are littered with the corpses of men who mistook female curiosity for female compassion. When subjected to the backbone contradiction, the red-pilled man does not apologize, nor does he rage, for both responses surrender the initiative to the tester. He wields the classical distinguo, the dialectical separation of categories that has been the hallmark of rational inquiry since the schoolmen formalized it in the 13th century. You separate her emotional hysteria from the objective reality of your competence. You distinguish between her subjective discomfort and your objective performance. You look her in the eye with the steady gaze of a man who has faced worse than her displeasure, state the truth calmly and without malice, and let her emotional storm crash against the cliffs of your masculine resolve. You do not jump into the churning water to save her from her own tempest. You do not explain your reasoning as though she were a colleague. You hold the line, you stand fast, you let the crucible burn. The paradox is that the woman who screams at you in fury tonight will be testing the seam of your resolve by morning, and if it holds, if you remain unmoved by her agitation, if the vessel does not crack, her fury will transmute into respect, and respect into desire, and desire into the only kind of loyalty that female nature is capable of producing, loyalty born of recognized strength, not extracted pity. True masculine emotional regulation is not the feminized suppression of feeling that leftist propagandists accuse us of practicing, but the classical subordination of passion to reason that Aristotle identified as the mark of the virtuous man, that Aquinas refined into the architecture of the moral life, that every civilization worthy of the name has recognized as the foundation of civic order. A man feels the full devastating weight of reality, the grief, the fear, the rage, the disappointment, yet acts according to his duty regardless. This is not repression. This is the transcendental good in action, the alignment of appetitive power with rational direction, the soul operating as it was designed to operate. The man who suppresses his anger entirely is a coward. The man who vents his anger without restraint is a tyrant. The man who feels his anger completely channels its energy toward righteous action and refuses to be controlled by the emotion he has mastered. This is the virtuous man, the logos embodied, the pillar upon which civilizations are constructed and maintained. We must violently reject the leftist dogma that male emotional expression must look like female emotional incontinence, that a man's tears are somehow more authentic than his silence, that his suffering only counts if he performs it for spectators. The figures supporting this analysis are not hidden or obscure. They remain publicly available and deliberately ignored by every institution charged with interpreting reality honestly. American women initiate approximately 70% of all divorces, according to the National Survey of Family Growth, with the proportion rising to nearly 90% among college-educated women. The non-paternity rate, the percentage of men raising children they did not biologically sire under the false belief of paternity, runs between 2 and 10% depending on the population studied, which translates to millions of men across the West enslaved to another man's genetic legacy through the systematic deception of their female partners. The suicide rate among divorced men is roughly double that of divorced women, with middle-aged males comprising the demographic most likely to take their own lives in the aftermath of family court proceedings that strip them of their children, their homes, and their reason to continue. These are not isolated incidents. These are statistical realities that the gynocentric establishment refuses to acknowledge because acknowledgement would require a fundamental restructuring of the legal, cultural, and economic superstructure that extracts male labor and male life to fund female choice. The solution is not rage, though rage is justified. The solution is not withdrawal, though withdrawal is tempting. The solution is the reconstruction of masculine competence as an autonomous good, justified by its own excellence, requiring no female permission slip for its existence. You do not pass the shit test by studying the correct answers, for there are no correct answers to a rigged examination. You pass the shit test by refusing to accept the premise that you are being examined at all, by operating from a frame of such anchored competence that the test itself becomes irrelevant, The metal does not beg the fire for approval. The metal endures the fire and emerges purified. Build your competence. Strengthen your frame. Master your craft. Cultivate your brotherhood. Order your soul according to the Logos. When the crucible comes, and it will come again and again, for that is the nature of the feminine, you will not need to calculate your response. The response will be what it has always been for men of substance, the quiet, immovable, undeniable presence of a man who knows who he is, what he is for, and whose image he bears. I must expose the grotesque reality of this weaponized insecurity, for the aesthetic shit test is a calculated act of biological warfare against sovereign masculine focus. The feminine chaos instinct violently despises a mind locked in productive contemplation, precisely because a man actively forging order out of intellectual chaos owes no immediate tribute to her vanity. Consider the formal logic of her deceit. If her cosmetic effort is merely an accidental alteration masquerading as an essential virtue, then her demand for your validation is nothing less than a demand that you participate in ontological fraud. She is launching a tactical assault on your logos, seeking to violently rupture your state of flow and recenter the entire cosmos around her solipsistic ego. Behold the mechanics of this parasitic disruption: the transcendent mirror, aesthetic observation, cosmetic fraud, and the burden of provision. Imagine, if you will, a man engaged in the supreme masculine telos of creation. He is seated at his desk, his mind locked in the iron grip of productive contemplation, forging order out of intellectual chaos, perhaps analyzing a complex financial model or writing a philosophical treatise. Enter the feminine chaos instinct. His wife or girlfriend, having just blown 300 on balayage, a glorified hair dyeing technique that consists of painting dead protein filaments with harsh chemicals, struts into his peripheral vision. She pauses, she preens. She waits for the universe to collapse inward to worship her vanity. When the man, rightfully holding his cognitive line against the siege of distraction, does not immediately drop his higher order duties to shower her with praise, she erupts. You never notice anything. You don't care about me. The objective, irrefutable truth. He was exercising the very focus that builds and sustains civilization. Her solipsism, however, demands that his entire cosmos grind to a halt the second she alters her aesthetic accident. This is not love, it is a biological hostage situation. Let us fix our definitions as the architects of Western thought command, beginning with the very concept at hand. The word aesthetics descends from the Greek aesthetikos, meaning perceptive or sensitive, grounded firmly in sensory observation. When a woman shit tests a man by altering her hair, gluing on synthetic talons, or donning a hypersexualized outfit and indignantly demands he notice, she is not merely seeking a hollow compliment. She is testing the vigilance of her physical guardian. Can this man, who claims dominion over her world, fail to perceive a threat or a shift in his immediate environment? Premise A, women biologically seek men of high status, unyielding vigilance, and capable resource accumulation. Premise B, a man who fails to observe micro-changes in his environment lacks the situational awareness necessary to provision and protect against lurking predators. Conclusion, therefore, a woman's demand that a man notice her cosmetic effort is an evolutionary fitness test, ensuring her chosen mate is not a blind, oblivious fool destined to get them both killed. She wants to know if the watchman is actually awake. But the modern iteration of this test is entirely corrupted by the grotesque hypocrisies of cultural Marxism. Consider the self-refuting dogma of leftist feminism, the exact same ideological cult that screams from the rooftops that beauty standards are patriarchal oppression and parades the delusion that all bodies are beautiful, will spend 3 hours applying chemical warfare to their faces and surgically implanting toxic silicone into their chests to pass a shit test. Feminism is inherently contradictory. It demands the total abolition of the masculine gaze while simultaneously building a multi-billion-dollar cosmetic industry to beg for its approval. It is an ideological cancer that hates the natural order, yet ruthlessly exploits it for power. These degenerate demons of modernism tell you that natural biological reality is a social construct, while literally constructing artificial faces out of latex and Botox to cheat that very same reality. In the classical prelapsarian tradition of Western civilization, the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful are inexorably unified. You cannot sever the beautiful from the true without committing an act of ontological fraud. True beauty is an ontological reality. It is the radiance of a virtuous soul manifesting in physical health, vitality, and moral proportion. What the modern woman calls effort is frequently a deceptive parody of this transcendental. The modern shit test relies on accidental alterations masquerading as essential virtues. When a woman presents a physically altered, surgically modified face and demands your validation, she is committing an act of ontological treason. She is demanding that you validate a lie. To surrender to this fraud, to bow down to her artificiality, is to participate in the degradation of objective reality itself. You must refuse to legitimize the lie. Consider the empirical data of this parasitic cycle. The modern cosmetics and plastic surgery industries are titanic engines of deception, heavily subsidized by the disposable income of women, disposable income paradoxically funded by the very men they claim they do not need. Data consistently demonstrates that men are the only net lifetime taxpayers in Western civilization. The entire apparatus of the social welfare state, including the subsidization of female choices, rests squarely on the sweat and sacrifice of male labor. Women demand male provision to fund the very illusion they use to shit-test those same men. It is a Marxist redistribution of male energy into female vanity of cosmic proportions. They extract your resources through state coercion and cultural guilt, only to weaponize those resources against your rationality. Do not be fooled for a single second. This aesthetic shit test is fundamentally an act of psychological warfare against male focus. The feminine chaos instinct utterly despises the masculine mind, locked in a state of flow. By demanding he notice her superficial changes, she seeks to violently rupture his state of productive contemplation and recenter the universe around her boundless ego. Her feelings are not your responsibility. Her vanity is not your master. The strategic, virtuous, and ruthlessly rational response to the aesthetic shit test is to praise the form while entirely rejecting the accident. Acknowledge her objective baseline attractiveness to satisfy the biological need for validation, but flatly refuse to validate the deceptive artificiality. Look her dead in the eye, smile calmly and say, "You look beautiful, as you always do. Did you think the 500 makeup made you better?" This strikes like a thunderbolt. It establishes your unshakable dominance, asserts your adherence to an objective, transcendent standard, and crushes the Marxist illusion that her artificially inflated ego is the highest prize in the room. You are the anchor of reality. Refuse to drift in her sea of cosmetics. Yet the cosmetic charade is merely the preliminary skirmish in a total war for your sovereignty. Once a woman successfully commands you to betray the objective reality of your own eyes, she inevitably escalates to demanding you betray your brothers. I have watched this demonic dialectic of isolation play out with terrifying precision. The feminine imperative seeks absolute monopoly over a man's psyche, and to achieve total dominion, she must systematically amputate his male alliances. It is a brutally simple syllogism of enslavement. If a man can be bullied into validating a physical lie, she calculates he can be terrified into committing fratricide. Fratricide by fiat, gynocentric warfare on male loyalty and the subsidiarity of the band. I once watched a groom assassinate his own character 3 weeks before his wedding. His bride-to-be, draped in the subtle tyranny of a wedding planner's clipboard, handed him a list of his closest friends, men he had bled with, built with, and relied on for a decade. She declared them bad influences who made her uncomfortable. The reality these men saw through her manipulative architecture and possessed the fortitude to warn him. Faced with the ultimate hostage negotiation, a cancelled wedding versus a severed brotherhood, he capitulated. He didn't just uninvite them. He betrayed them to appease the fleeting, irrational, emotional weather of a woman. This is the best man's burden, a high-stakes shit test designed to see if you will sacrifice your lifelong brothers on the altar of her immediate tyrannical comfort. Let us ground this in grammar, the first pillar of truth. The word loyalty descends from the Old French loyauté, rooted in the Latin legalis, meaning that which is legal, legitimate, and true to one's oath. Loyalty is not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It is a binding structural agent of Western civilization. When a woman tests a man by demanding he sever his friendships, proving to see if he will betray their confidence, to prove his devotion to her, she is testing the structural integrity of his soul. She is measuring the strength of the steel in his spine. If he bends the knee and breaks his oath to his brothers, he proves his word is worthless, his vows are conditional, and his very being is open to the highest bidder. Notice the absurd hypocrisy of the gynocentric narrative. The feminist establishment relentlessly pushes the delusion of male toxicity and pathologizes the bro code, framing male solidarity as a criminal conspiracy against women. Why? Because female friendship is an endless, documented carnival of backstabbing, solipsistic rivalry, and performative victimhood. Women project their own Machiavellian nature onto men. They label male loyalty a toxic conspiracy, precisely because they are biologically and psychologically incapable of achieving it themselves. A woman's alliance lasts only until the social hierarchy shifts or a more profitable victim narrative emerges. A man's brotherhood is forged in the fires of shared hardship and remains unbreakable. This demonization of male spaces is not an accident of modern romance. It is the explicit doctrine of cultural Marxism. The critical theorists of the 20th century explicitly identified the patriarchal family and male fraternal structures, lodges, guilds, clubs, the apprenticeship mastery ladder as the primary obstacles to communist revolution. They knew that a man grounded in a band of brothers is immune to state propaganda and ideological subversion. By weaponizing the female shit test against male friendship, feminism has achieved what Marx and Engels could only theorize about: the total atomization of the male sex. A man stripped of his band is an isolated, easily conquered serf, perfectly prepared for the slaughterhouse of the therapeutic state. Within the classical Western canon, the principle of subsidiarity dictates that matters ought to be handled by the smallest, most local competent authority, the family, the guild, the brotherhood, before the state or an overarching power intervenes. It is the framework of freedom and the bedrock of civil society. When a woman demands you disparage your male friends, she is committing a political atrocity on a microscale. She is acting as a totalitarian state, violently violating the subsidiarity of your male associations. She does not merely want to be your lover. She wants to be the sole arbiter of your reality, the dictator of your social economy, and the unchallenged monarch of your psychological landscape. The logic of this feminine isolation is mathematically irrefutable. Consider the syllogism. Premise A: women instinctively seek absolute resource extraction and undivided emotional subjugation from a male partner to secure their own survival and hypergamic interests. Premise B: a man deeply integrated into a loyal male brotherhood possesses an alternative source of honor, objective reality checking, and material defense, thereby limiting the woman's monopolistic control. Conclusion: therefore, the feminine imperative must instinctively seek to isolate the male from his brothers, to maximize her dominion over his psyche, his labor, and his capital. The math is flawless. The isolation is not a bug of the modern relationship. It is a feature of female nature. How do you defeat this? You do not argue the merits of your friends. You do not appeal to her emotions, for her goal is domination, not understanding. When she attempts to fracture your brotherhood, you must deploy absolute, terrifying boundary setting. You look her in the eye and state the natural law. He is my brother. My loyalty to him is non-negotiable. If you seek to destroy my oaths, you will be the one removed. You must build your male-only spaces, protect them ruthlessly, and make it unquestionably clear to any woman entering your life that your brotherhood is the bedrock upon which she walks. If she tries to crack the bedrock with her fiat, she is demolished. Male friendship is a reflection of the highest transcendental, the good found in mutual sacrifice. The Greco-Roman phalanx the medieval guild, the philosophical lyceum, these were not just economic or military structures, they were sacred spaces of masculine initiation. Defending your friend's honor when they are absent is not merely passing a shit test, it is a holy act of civilizational preservation. True masculine virtue dictates that loyalty to a brother who has weathered the storms of life with you violently supersedes the passing emotional hurricanes of a romantic partner. A man who sells out his friends to appease a woman's fleeting shit test demonstrates a fatal character flaw. He possesses no honor code, no logos, no soul, only a slavish, pathetic devotion to the gynocentric teat. Choose your brothers, defend the band. Let the empire of lies burn before you sever the ties that bind you to reality. But the feminine imperative does not limit its conquest to your social circle. What begins as a shit test in the living room metastasizes into a shit test legislated in the halls of power. The impulse that drives a woman to isolate you from your brothers is the exact same impulse that drives the feminist voting bloc to isolate men from their property, their due process, and their sacred rights. The personal is political, yes. The Marxists got one thing right, though not in the way they intended. The micro-shit test was merely the prototype. The macro-shit test is the administrative state itself. And until we name this Leviathan for what it is, we will continue to confuse our imprisonment with our own virtue. The macro-shit test, Marcuse, the administrative state, and the feminization of the West. Let us define our terms, for grammar is the gatekeeper of truth, and to misdefine a word is to surrender the battlefield before the first shot is fired. The word state derives from the Latin status, a condition of standing. But whose standing, alienation from the Latin alienatus, means to be made foreign, estranged from one's own nature. The dark architects of cultural Marxism understood this intimately. They deliberately weaponize female hypergamy and solipsism to forge the ultimate societal shit test. The administrative state. Consider the macro syllogism of our modern feminized tyranny. Premise A. Women are biologically drawn to centralized, unassailable power, hypergamy. Premise B. The modern administrative state assumes the role of primary provider and protector, doling out welfare, enforcing alimony, and legislating an artificial safety net. Conclusion. Therefore, women will naturally ally with the state against their own husbands and fathers, voting for the systemic theft of male resources to fund their independence from male authority. The state has become the ultimate omniscient, omnipotent, hypergamous alpha male, rendering the actual human male alienated from his own labor, his family, and his biological destiny. You want to see this macro shit test executed in the flesh? Look at the ruins of the family court. A man bleeds for 20 years to build a business from the bare dirt. He marries, honors his vows, and provides relentlessly. His wife, infected by the cultural mandate of perpetual dissatisfaction, commits adultery. In the gynocentric administrative courts, she is not punished. She is richly rewarded. The judge strips him of half his assets, orders lifetime alimony, and grants her custody of his children, effectively rendering him a visitor in his own home. Should he refuse to finance his own destruction, the state will send men with guns to throw him in a cage. This is the ultimate macro shit test. The state asserts its absolute dominance over the male, demanding he continue to provision a woman who has betrayed him at the point of a government rifle. Do not fool yourself into thinking this is an accident of policy. It is the very engine of the republic's collapse. The classical concept of the mixed constitution relies on the careful balancing of competing interests, but gynocentrism is by its very nature a totalitarian ideology. It cannot tolerate opposition. Look at the empirical, undeniable data. Men are the sole net lifetime taxpayers. We build the bridges, mine the coal, write the code, and bleed in the mud. The administrative state, wholly driven by feminist policy, exists solely as a massive wealth transfer mechanism, extracting the sweat of masculine competence to subsidize the chaotic, destructive choices of feminine irrationality. When a woman votes for a leftist politician who promises to tax her male neighbors to fund her useless gender studies degree, she is not exercising a democratic right. She is committing an act of civilizational treason. She is destroying the very apparatus of provision and protection that allows her to breathe. we are funding our own cultural execution. This execution is ruthlessly rationalized through the pathology of safetyism. The therapeutic state has replaced the transcendental pursuit of the good with the pathetic feminine pursuit of absolute safety. By elevating physical and emotional comfort above duty, and by treating emotional harm as a grievous crime superseding objective physical reality, the feminized state has institutionalized the irrational emotionalism of the worst female archetype. This is the death knell of civilization. The masculine conquers reality. The feminine, left unchecked and unconstrained by male reason, cowers from it and demands the government exterminate the threat. We have abandoned the pursuit of greatness for the guarantee of harmlessness, transforming a civilization of frontiersmen into a terrified daycare center, demanding the state spank anyone who speaks the truth. You cannot reason with this Leviathan using dialectic, because the state and its feminist vanguard operate entirely on the feminine logic of solipsistic emotional validation. You do not debate a tyrant. You do not apologize to a feminist. The only rational, virtuous response to a systemic shit test is absolute, ruthless strategic withdrawal of consent. Do not marry a woman infected by the woke mind virus. Do not hire the diversity quota. Do not pay for the degeneracy of an OnlyFans thought. Do not validate the administrative state's feminized lies. Withdraw your masculine energy entirely. Let the feminist utopias collapse into the chaotic, starving ruins they inherently are, and prepare to build a new fortress of logos upon their ashes. That fortress requires an unshakable foundation, which means the aggressive reinstitution of the apprenticeship mastery ladder. The restoration of Western civilization demands that men withdraw entirely from the feminized university and the corporate HR hellscape. We must return to the guild, the trades, and the entrepreneurial brotherhood. We must build wealth, property, and competence that the administrative state cannot easily seize. A man's labor is his sovereign property, an extension of his very soul, and it must be restricted exclusively to women and institutions that honor the natural law. We must starve the beast by becoming sovereign architects of our own survival. Ultimately, the highest act of masculine courage is to speak the truth when a feminized world demands a lie. Every time a man refuses to mouth a fabricated pronoun, every time he refuses to apologize for his raw competence, and every time he laughs boldly in the face of a feminist shaming tactic, he strikes a mortal blow against the satanic hydra of the woke Borg. Reclaim your agency. Reject the false virtues of the nanny state. Stand tall in the logos. Enforce the boundaries of reality. And let your absolute refusal to comply be the sledgehammer that shatters this gynocentric illusion into dust. I am handing you the schematic of your own emancipation. For generations, you have been expected to build a marble civilization upon a foundation of feminist quicksand. And when the spire inevitably collapses under the weight of its own biological contradictions, the architects of your misery point their manicured fingers and blame your toxic masculinity. You now possess the dialectical weaponry to see the matrix for what it truly is, a macro shit test administered by a parasitic administrative state and its gynocentric shock troops. Look at the empirical wreckage of this godless gynotopia. In the United States alone, the machinery of the family court systematically processes fathers into destitute visitors, treating a man's genetic legacy and life's labor as a negotiable asset to be extracted and redistributed. We live under a regime where a woman can unilaterally extinguish your lineage, fabricate a domestic violence accusation without a shred of empirical evidence to steal your home, and if you protest this grand larceny, the state's enforcers will drag you away in handcuffs while she cashes the alimony check. The tragic statistics of male despair, thousands of men swallowing barrels or stepping off ledges into the abyss, tell the real story of a civilization that has pathologized the sacred masculine spirit into a state of alienation. But you, having stared into the abyss of this manufactured chaos and named its demons, are no longer a casualty. You are the vanguard. You have decoded the grammar of the feminine imperative and dismantled the false ontology of the cultural Marxist lie. When she demands you surrender your intellect to validate her fragile ego, you will hold the line of unyielding reason. When she paints her face in chemical war colors and demands you worship the artificial illusion over her essential form, you will smile the knowing smile of a man who sees past the veil of ontological fraud. When she demands you sacrifice your brothers on the altar of her boundless solipsism, you will defend the sacred band of your fellowship, because you know that male loyalty is the structural steel of Western civilization, the very mortar that built the monasteries, the guilds, and the constitutions that she now seeks to tear down with the poison of critical theory. You are no longer a confused beast of burden, laboring in the feminine vineyard, producing the wealth of the world only to have it crushed into the bitter wine of Marxist resentment. You are an ascended master of reality, a sovereign lord of your own agency. Go forth and live this truth with the terrible, unapologetic force of a natural law hurricane. Refuse to kneel before the idol of the therapeutic state. Withdraw your masculine energy from the institutions that hate you. Starve the beast of your surplus competence, and ruthlessly build parallel brotherhoods grounded in the logos. You are the living embodiment of the transcendental good, the true, and the beautiful. Let the sterile, feminist bureaucrats feel the seismic shockwave of a man who has reclaimed his divine birthright, his unyielding honor, and his sacred purpose. The gynocentric spell is shattered. The truth has set you free. Now go forth, conquer your chaos, and rebuild the world. And now the sponsored book introduction, The Science of Shit Testing, cracking women's cryptic signals and winning their hearts. Most men live in a fog of confusion, desperately trying to please women while getting nothing but contempt in return. I was one of them. I bent over backward to meet every demand, swallowed insults disguised as jokes, and watched my marriage crumble the moment I showed vulnerability. Then I woke up. This book isn't theory, it's battle-tested survival code forged through humiliation, divorce court, and years studying why modern relationships leave men broken. If you're tired of being her emotional tampon, paycheck provider, and chore monkey, I'll show you how to flip the script. Women test men because evolution demands it. Their biology compels them to probe for weakness, just as female chimps provoke conflicts to identify the strongest mate. Fail these tests, and you'll join the 72% of divorced men stripped of assets, dignity, and access to their kids. But pass them? You'll command respect, reignite desire, and build a legacy instead of bankrolling some yoga instructor's Bali retreat. This book dissects the primal triggers behind her mind games, from playful jabs like, "You're just like my ex," to controlling demands masked as affection. You'll learn body language hacks used by FBI, hostage negotiators, dark triad tactics to make her chase you, and how to dodge the marriage plantation's financial traps. This isn't for the faint-hearted. If you think toxic masculinity is real, or that vulnerability earns male respect, close this book now, go knit a sweater. Write poetry, vote for higher alimony laws. But if you're a man who's fed up with feminist gaslighting, dead bedrooms, and raising sons to apologize for existing, this is your lifeline. You'll discover why Japan's collapse proves societies die when men surrender authority, how to weaponize sexual market value math, and why Genghis Khan's unapologetic dominance built empires. The data doesn't lie. Women reward strength and punish compromise. Your choice is simple, lead or kneel. The system wants you docile, dependent, and begging for scraps. I'm handing you the red pill. Swallow it, and let's get to work. The Science of Shit Testing, cracking women's cryptic signals and winning their hearts. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.